3, 2, 1. Hello, and thank you for tuning in. I'm going to retell a ghost story on this. I'd say if it was, of all the things I've had happen to me, quite a few of them stand out that, to me, sometimes I almost question myself. And then I got to think back to a lot of times, such as this story that I called Memento Mori, which there's no denying, there's no two ways around it. It was definitely a haunting, the spirit interacting with me. And it was not a pleasant time for me at the time, though I stood up pretty well to it. And I'm going back to when I was in my early 30s, and I was a training sergeant in an infantry company in Whitehall, New York. But this story takes place in Putnam Station, and here's where Putnam Station is. Okay, Putnam Station, New York. Here's where it's at on the map. Oh, let me find it. Crown Point's a beautiful town. Very small town on the lake. Ticonderoga, historical. There, you've heard of Fort Ticonderoga's there. Another beautiful, really small town, really. And Putnam Station is right there on this southern end of Lake Champlain. And that would be Lake Champlain. So that's Putnam Station. Very, very beautiful small town. Vermont is on the eastern side of the lake, and New York is, of course, on the western side of the lake. And noteworthy, sorry about that, Lake George is not too far off to the west of Putnam Station. And I'll tell you, if you've never been to this area, if you can ever make it up there, Lake George particularly, highly recommended. It is very, very beautiful area. And Fort Ticonderoga is definitely worth checking out. And the locals know this. A lot of people don't that travel, but I was a local there. You could see the fort. There was a lot of bloodshed there in the French and Indian War and the Revolution. But down on the same grounds, there's a place called the Queen's Gardens, which is an English garden that was built like a couple hundred years ago. It's very beautiful. The locals keep it up. Very worth seeing. The Queen's Garden on Fort Ticonderoga. But this has to do with Putnam Station, and that is where Putnam Station is on the map. And by the way, that Putnam United Presbyterian Church is more or less right across the street from the house I'm talking about. And there's really just pretty much that church, the house, an old graveyard, and some mountains there. Really, it's very isolated. A lot more than you might think this map lets on. So, that's where Putnam Station is. All right, so now you know where it's at on the map. This happened a long time ago. Oh, good Lord. A little over 30 years ago. And I call this guy, in my book, I called him John Sills. But that's not his real name, the ghost. Actually, this is one of the few hauntings where I knew who the ghost was. Pretty certain about it. And maybe you'll understand why when I get through this story. But his real name was Emmett. And I knew his family. I knew his grandson, Kurt, who was my age and kind of friends of mine. And if anybody in that family, and I'm just going to say his first name, but if anybody sees this, which I highly, highly doubt, but you never know, just let me know if you're offended. I don't think they would be. Let me know. I'll take it down. But I don't think there's a problem with it. His name was Emmett, and I knew his last name, but there's no need for that here. So I came into living into what was Emmett's house, an old dairy farm in Putnam Station. Really old, like trying to figure out how old that place was based on the foundation of stonework and the timbers, the original timbers that still had tree bark on them, really rough hewn. That place probably built like around about 1800, I'd say, maybe even older than that, considering where it was at, about 3 miles away from Fort Ticonderoga, which was built in the 1750s, but that was really a frontier area then. Up along Lake Champlain in the mountains, Putnam Station is really a very, very beautiful, scenic town. People from New Jersey, New York City, when they drive up north to see the fall colors, it's the kind of place they take pictures of. When I lived there, it wasn't uncommon to see people pulling over and taking pictures of the scenery. It was very gorgeous. So I wound up living in this house alone. A big old farm, well, it wasn't that big, but a farmhouse. And how I wound up living there alone, I wasn't supposed to be alone. I was engaged to get married to my friend in Berlin, Germany, Angel. And that didn't happen. She couldn't leave Berlin from her family. Needed her. So she wanted to live in a beautiful place in the countryside. She loved it up there. She'd been in upstate New York and she thought it was beautiful. But that never happened. But I got that great big old place thinking it was going to be my love nest with my new wife. Just wound up being me and a ghost. And I'll get to that. But though her and I stayed friends through the years, and she's another story, an exceptional story that I've told on her. Berliner Angel from Berlin, Germany. Our dear friend Simona. So I started looking for a place, a house, and in the paper back then, this is, around 1990, 91, something like that, around there. And I saw that there was a farm for rent, and the price looked right. And so I called the guy up, and the place was still open. Arranged to meet the guy at the place, and I was really delighted. And so I drove up there. It was about 17 miles north of my work, which was at the time Whitehall. And I met this guy at this farmhouse, and one of the reasons I'm retelling this story, here's a picture of the house I found. This is the house when I lived there. And you can see my Jeep in the garage. I had a black Jeep Wrangler. You can see I backed it into this garage. But that's the house. And no, it's nothing fancy. I thought it was. What you don't see in that picture are about 3 large old wooden barns that are would have been on the left, to the left, but they're not in view of the in this picture. But there were several barns with dairy equipment in them. Still, I could have run the place as a dairy farm, on a small level. So I met the man there, who I guess he owned the place. Picture off. And he looked to be a man about my age now, kind of in his early 60s or so. And he and his wife had a house up the road, very beautiful place. And they were retired from New York City. And they wanted to get out of the city. And they found a really great life up there, just up the road from me. I mean, they had a beautiful house, country house. Beautiful, like stuff out of fairy tales. And they had a nice place. And they were great people too. And he and his wife. So he's showing me the house, all right? Oh, wet my whistle. I've had a long day. I worked today. I'm back to work at a factory. And I've had a long day, so you excuse me. I skipped the tea for this one. The first thing I noticed when I went in there, which, given that I had had a lot of hauntings in my life up to this point, a lot. Every house I lived in Whitehall had hauntings, some of them severe. So I was starting to think everything was haunted around there. And now this old farmhouse, and which I was going to move into. The first thing I noticed was that whoever lived there before me had left abruptly left. I mean, their plates, glasses, silverware, and food were still on their dining room table, which actually was in the living room, what I would call the living room or the parlor, whatever. And I'm talking like there were plates there with bacon and eggs and toast and like a cup of coffee. It looked like they'd been sitting there for a couple of weeks, but it was still there. Like they had their full dinner there, breakfast in front of them, and just left. And their car was still in the garage. And everything was still in that house. They just left. They left their dinner, they got up, they left. Left their car there, left everything on the table, there were dirty dishes. The place wasn't filthy. But I mean, everything, they just left, abruptly left. So I'm like, this is strange. I didn't know anything about the place, honestly. I didn't know much about the town either. And so I took note of that. And I started getting vibes about the place, like a vibe, like a cold heaviness. And I decided to go out on a limb with this guy, and he was very friendly, very talkative. He seemed to like me a lot. And I was about 30 then. I think he and his wife were lonely, like the son they never had, maybe. I don't know. He'd like try to take me under his wing to run a dairy farm there, but I had a job. That was after this. I went out on a limb and I asked him about the place. I said, hey, this is going to sound strange, but it's going to sound really weird, but I got to ask you. And he's like, yeah, very friendly person. I said, is this place all right? I felt really weird asking. He says, what do you mean? I said, is this place quiet? And he's like looking at me puzzled. I said, is this place haunted? And he looked back and I thought he was going to tell me like, you're nuts. I don't believe in that stuff. But he said, he said, did somebody in town talk to you about this place? I said, no. I said, I've just had a lot of experience with this stuff and I thought I should ask. He says, it's just John. Or actually Emmett. I call it John because that's who I called it in my book. I wrote all this down years ago. And so I read it again tonight. So I did write all this down in a book years ago. And I called him John then, but his name was Emmett. Emmett. He said, it's just Emmett. He said, I knew Emmett. He was a great guy, a very nice guy. He said he was a little bit eccentric. He said, but it's just Emmett. He's not going to hurt you. You have nothing to worry about. He says, I knew Emmett. He was a good man. I'm thinking like, that's good news and it's not good news. I'm thinking, So the place is haunted. I never asked him what happened, what was the story with all their full breakfast, everything right there left abandoned on their table. I mean, you get the picture? I mean, it looked like it was a week, 2 weeks old, but all their food was still sitting on their plates. Coffee cups, glass of milk. I would find out later what the story is, but not from him. I'll get to that. And so he said it's just Emmett. He said he was eccentric, but he's a very good person. He's not going to bother you any at all. I said, all right, good enough. At least I knew who it was this time. And the other places I was at, I didn't have that benefit of the doubt. And so I wound up moving in there and waiting on my bride, but she never showed up. I would find out later why. She had stood up. She couldn't leave, moving out, immigrating to America from Berlin, Germany, and she had family there. I can understand it. It's a lot. It's a big move. So I understood it. But I'm living in this place by myself now. And it was definitely haunted. And I will get into those stories. Definitely. This is one of many that I can remind myself, yes, Tim, these things really happen. You know, I wouldn't, anything I've ever told on here, there's no doubt in my mind what it was. It was a haunting. Or I would, because I check things out. If I think there's any possibility it could be something else, I'll just write it off, you know, because I'm not looking for this stuff. And I certainly wasn't looking for it there. So I move into the place and things started happening. Knocks, loud knocks, doors, heavy footsteps. I mean, it was an old wooden house. And picture back on. And you'll see the front porch in this picture. And you'll see the front door. The front door opened into the kitchen, which had a giant old wood-burning stove that I used, and you could cook on it, and I cooked on it. It was pretty cool. And you'll see my Jeep, the black Jeep, front of my Jeep poking out of the garage there. And between the kitchen and where my Jeep was a separate room, all wooden walls. The whole place was made out of wood, except the foundation. And that was a room that firewood was kept in, a lot of it. I'd say about 3/4 of firewood was in that room. I'd say 2 or 3/4 full face cord of firewood was in that room. So when I was in my kitchen, which I heated and cooked with wood, I just would open the door, you know, from inside the kitchen. I wouldn't have to go outside. And very conveniently, there was all that firewood right in there, you know. So there was a door that connected my kitchen. It went from my kitchen to this room that was full of wood. And then another door opened into my garage, so I could walk into my garage as well without going outside. So quite often, one of the things this ghost did for attention, which was quite nerve-rattling, because, picture off, I want you to understand the time and my lifestyle at this time and place. First off, I went to church like 3 times a week, and I worked 5 days a week and sometimes 7 days a week. So I was either at work or I was at church quite a lot. I went to church a lot in Whitehall, and I probably was going to the Assemblies of God at that time and point, which I enjoyed that church a lot. And Pastor Benham and all, I remember him, and a lot of people. So I was going to church a lot. I had a few friends in Whitehall, but they wouldn't drive up. Nobody visited me there. Nobody. Very, very rarely. I did not watch TV, so there was no TV. And since I was a child, I decided I did not want to watch TV. I won't go into my reasons, but I've stayed pretty true to that. I didn't watch TV from childhood to present, though I do watch YouTube a lot now. But back then there wasn't any internet to speak of. There was, but I mean, it was just at its beginning. I didn't have a computer or the internet. There were no cell phones. I had a landline, a regular dial-up old school telephone, that you dial the number in the olden days, before cell phones and the internet. But there was no TV. I didn't have a big stereo where I played music. I had a very small radio. I played guitar a lot, like now. Read the Bible. I sang, but there was no TV set in my house, and the radio was very rarely on, very rarely. So it was very, very quiet in my house. And a very, very rural place. There was no roads nearby really at all, no major roads nearby. And so you couldn't hear any traffic. There'd be a car might go down my road in front of my house. You might get a car down there once every hour, you know, then. And none at night. And I want to tell you, this place, like the nearest large city to this place would be about 100 miles south, which would be Albany, New York. At least 100 miles south, maybe more. So at night, it was very quiet there, and it got properly dark outside. I mean, the sky wasn't bleached with city lights. I mean, it got very starry, very dark, very starry. You can see, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful place, very peaceful. So you can understand how nerve-rattling it would be when I'd be sitting in my kitchen by myself at night, and the wood room, which adjoined the kitchen, which I just explained, somebody would be taking these fire logs, like 10-pound logs, and throwing them against the wall between the wood room where the wood was, and then there was a kitchen in the house, and I'm in here, and you could hear logs getting thrown up against the side of the wall. Bang, clunk, clunk, clunk. You could hear them hit the ground and then roll, and just bang. It's like somebody just heaving logs at the wall. And I would jump up and open that door to the wood room, and it would be quiet. And it wouldn't be long, maybe an hour later, more of it. Bang, bang. There's no doubt about it. Somebody was throwing logs of wood up against the wall where I was sitting inside the house. Not from the outside, but from inside where the wood room was. They were throwing logs against the wall. And they did that a lot. Emmett did that a lot. He wasn't very happy with me being there. He never left that house, at least when I was there. And I'll go on to that a bit. The man was born there, probably around 1900. And he lived there. He was born in that house, and he died in that house when he was in his 80s. And he was buried next door, and somebody in town later on told me that he was buried standing up above ground per his wishes, which I never could substantiate that. I don't believe everything I'm told. But more on that. So I decided with that big house, I didn't need to use the upstairs. When I originally moved into the house, I thought I was going to be starting a new family. Married man, never happened. Lived there alone the whole time. However, my children, actually, from my marriage, that ended against my will, but there's not much I could do about it, in a divorce. But I visited my children, and I saw them in the summertime. So I figured it'd be they could have the rooms upstairs. There's like 3 or 4 bedrooms upstairs, small ones.